इन्द्र समर्पण समदर्शन जग जन दुख जाय। नमो नमो प्रभु बाकमनातीत नमो नमो प्रभु बाकमनातीत। प्रभु मन वचन एकाधार ज्योतिरज्योति उज्जल रीति कंदर ज्योतिरज्योति उज्जल रीति कंदर तुमी तम भंजनहार प्रभु तुमी तम भंजनहार। नमो नमो प्रभु बाकमनातीत नमो नमो प्रभु बाकमनातीत मन वचन एकाधार प्रभु मन वचन एकाधार ज्योतिरज्योति उज्जल रीति कंदर ज्योतिरज्योति उज्जल रीति कंदर तुमी तम भंजनहार प्रभु तुमी तम भंजनहार। धिधि लंग रंग भंग बाजे अंग संग मृदंग धिधि लंग रंग भंग बाजे अंग संग मृदंग। गाइছে ছন্দ ভকত বৃন্দ আরতি তোমার গাইছে ছন্দ ভকত বৃন্দ আরতি তোমার জয় জয় আরতি তোমার হর হর আরতি তোমার শিব শিব আরতি তোমার। খণ্ডান ভব বন্ধন জগ বন্দন বন্দিত মায়। জয় শ্রী গুরু মহারাজ কি জয়। ओं ह्रीं ऋतं तमोचलो गुणजित गुणेभ्यः नाक्तां तेवां सकरुणां तव पादपद्मं मोहाङ्कषां बहुकृतां न भजे जतोऽहं तस्मात्तमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो भक्तिर्भगश्च भजनं भवभेदकारी गच्छान्तलं सुविपुलं गमनाय तात्मां वक्त्रधृतोऽपि हृदये न मे भाति किञ्चित् तस्मात्तमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो तेजस्तरन्ति तरसा त्वयि तृप्ततृष्णा रागे कृते ऋतपथे त्वयि राम कृष्णे मार्तामृतां तव पदं मरणोर्विनाशां तस्मात्तमेव शरणं शरणं मम दीनबन्धो कृत्यां करोति कलुषां कुहकान्तकारे स्नान्तां शिवां सुविमलं तव नामो नाथ यस्मादहं त्वशरणो जगदेकगम्य तस्मात्तमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ सर्वमङ्गलं मङ्गले शिवे सर्वार्थसाधिके शरण्ये त्र्यम्बके गौरी नारायणी नमोऽस्तुते। सृष्टिस्थिति विनाशाना शक्तिभूते सनातने गुणाश्रये गुणमये नारायणी नमोऽस्तुते। शरणागत दीनार्त परित्राण परायणे सर्वस्यार्थे हरे देवी नारायणी नमोऽस्तुते। जय 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 जय भगवान श्री रामकृष्ण देव की जय जय स्वामी जी महाराज जी की जय।
नमः श्री अतिराजाय विवेकानंद सूरे सच्चित् सुख स्वरूपाय स्वामिने तापहारिणे. So we are on absolutely the last bit of this lecture, Real Nature of Man, and we had spent the last couple of discussions here explaining or trying to analyze how we could convert the ideas that are talked about here in terms of the real nature of all human beings, all beings more generally, how to translate that into practice. Today, Vivekananda takes this particular theme of converting these ideas into practice one notch higher by basically asking, what does it really mean, or basically answering this question, what does it really mean to be practical with respect to these ideals? What does practicality mean with respect to these ideas? And what we will differentiate the idea of practicality from is another completely opposite idea, which is sometimes confused with it, namely that of compromise. Sometimes compromise is passed off as practicality, which it certainly is not. And this is something that Vivekananda will put forward in no uncertain terms in this last few paragraphs of this particular lecture. Yeah? And here is what he is saying. Without the knowledge of the Spirit, all material knowledge is only adding fuel to fire, only giving into the hands of selfish man one more instrument to take what belongs to others, to live upon the life of others instead of giving up his life for them. This is the ideal of unselfishness that he was putting forward. And then he asks exactly this question. Is it practical? Is another question. Can it be practiced in modern society? And the answer is given in just these next couple of sentences, which are, truth does not pay homage to any society, ancient or modern. Society has to pay homage to truth or die. Once again, truth does not pay homage to any society, ancient or modern. Society has to pay homage to truth or die. This is, in a certain sense, the Siddhanta Vakya, meaning the conclusion. We'll come to this, but let's try to understand this. This is a profoundly simple message, and it summarizes some of the discussions that we've been having so far in terms of more conceptual things. What were they? We were discussing in Vedantic terms what is Vastu Tantra Jnana versus Purusha Tantra Jnana. What is a social norm is at best Purusha Tantra Jnana, which means it depends on a convention that we as a society accept. That convention does not necessarily have to be true, independent of time. It is useful for a particular time. It changes. That which is useful for society at a particular time changes as society evolves. The truth is the essential principle which does not change with passage of time. And it is only, what does the sentence mean then? Society must pay homage to truth or die. It means that if society does not adapt itself by translating these timeless principles into practice, then it becomes false with the passage of time. If other societies are capable of converting to practice deeper, more essential principles, then in the long run, those will survive over societies that merely follow a convention. Some time back, maybe a number of lectures back in a somewhat different context, I had mentioned this, that what is the meaning of mindless ritualism? Yeah? So for example, this is an apocryphal story. Don't take it literally. That there's some yagna that used to be conducted, and before the yagna was conducted, there was this ritual of catching hold of a cat, tying a string around its neck, and tying the rest of the string to the door of the doorway where the yagna was going to be conducted. And some cynic or maybe skeptic asked, why is this held? And then he actually tried to investigate. It turned out that when the first time that this same particular yagna was held, there was a cat that was disturbing it, and it was caught hold of, and a string was tied to its neck, and the remaining part of the string was tied to the door. That is how these things originate, and then because with the passage of time, we do not inquire into the significance of various acts, several times these acts become mindless. Things which were meant to serve a certain subjective purpose lose their meaning. Okay? So we were reading with some monastic brothers, this some of the Shankara's commentary on the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where he talks of Shraddha. Shraddha or Astikya Buddhi, or a dynamic, positive orientation of the mind as the essential quality. And what are auxiliary qualities? Auxiliary qualities are prostration, etc., all the various other things that we do. Why? Because the external act, if it is not backed by a conviction that there is something to be achieved subjectively, some truth towards which we can proceed subjectively through this external act, then the external act becomes meaningless and hollow. Just a ritual without any content. The principal thing, therefore, is the content. Finally, what are we aiming towards? What we are aiming towards is a clear and an uncontroversial understanding of the human subject, of our own subject, the subject of all experience. Therefore, the crucial emphasis is necessarily on the subjective content. And this old proverb, one can fool all the people some of the time, some of the people all the time, but not all of the people all the time. But much more important, what's most important here is not fooling oneself. We can pretend to others, maybe pretend to the rest of society by acting along certain lines, but so long as our external act, our external words and deeds are not in sync with our subjective convictions, this contradiction is bound to show up at some point of time, maybe not grossly, maybe not outside, but within us it will show up as an impediment in the way, for want of a better word, in our spiritual path. It's bound to show up at some point of time and create an impediment towards the achievement of the subjective goal. In very simple words, Sri Ramakrishna at some place says that the whole point, the essence of all practice, of all sadhana, is this, monmukh akkara. That means the mind and the speech should be one. Yeah? What it means, this is just a placeholder. It means what we internally feel or think is what is to be translated into practice. And if there are social norms that prevent us, then and we feel that we need to go in a different direction, then there is a certain measure of thought to be put behind it. Are we trying to do this just out of a whim? More generally, out of some kind of a selfish instinct? Or is it because we believe that there is some truth for which a certain social norm does need to be flouted? Social norms are social norms. They have been manufactured by human society for its proper functioning. Human beings like you and me have manufactured them. They have not fallen from the skies. They have been born out of a certain human necessity. But the core principle which has given rise to the formulation of these norms, those core principles are defining features of us as a species. And when we fall back on those basics, we cannot go wrong. Not we as individuals, we as societies. This is the meaning: society has to pay homage to truth or die. And then he explains, societies should be molded upon truth. And truth has not to adjust itself to society. This is a crucial thing. Truth is something that we feel is incontrovertible. If it kept changing, it would lose its nature as truth. And therefore, it is social norms, society itself, our rituals, our acts, all of that is to be subordinated to this primal movement of our core being, namely this movement towards truth. This is the meaning of this Upanishadic passage, this Shanti Mantra, Asatoma Sadgamaya. May we move from the Asat, the unreal, to Sat, Asatoma Satgamaya. And from darkness to light, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya. And the same movement again in the last one, Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Here the first aspect of this one is being emphasized, Asatoma Satgamaya. That means whatever is untrue in our lives, once we catch hold of it, the effort is to get rid of it and adjust our lives themselves to this higher calling of truth. In other words, what is meant by practicality is to convert these deeply held subjective ideals into practice. What is the requirement for that? And this is where it is completely the opposite of what is often passed off as practicality, but is in fact just compromise, nothing more. So what exactly is the requirement to carry an ideal into practice? It's hard. It's hard. Why? Because it causes us pain. Maybe somebody, a friend with whom we are on good terms, is not going to be on such good terms anymore if we act in a particular way which we know and believe to be true. In other words, it can give rise to friction. It can make us lose certain things which we are fond of. Holding on to a principle, more generally, I think in a different place, Vivekananda says, there is no higher religion than being true to oneself. The rest of this organized religion is thoroughly secondary. The core point is to be true to oneself. This is exactly the meaning of this expression, Monmukh Akkara, in Sri Ramakrishna's words. It's the same thing. He has also put it in a different sense. Bhaber ghare churi means that which is our core hold on a certain ultimate reality. That attitude should not be compromised by our acts. This is what it means. And here in simple language, it means being true to oneself. This is the core of all religion. The rest is secondary. Yeah? All the organized religion and its trappings, these are social constructs in order to preserve this core part aspect of religion in terms of a social structure. That social structure is not what the core religious urge in human beings is. And that core religious urge can manifest in different ways. It can manifest in the pursuit of art. It can manifest in the pursuit of science. It can manifest in the pursuit of social work. Any higher, nobler urge of human beings done for its own sake is a certain manifestation of this pre-rational, let us say, not irrational, not rational, but pre-rational, defining aspect of our being. And this is what truth is about. Which is why he has said here, truth does not pay homage to any society, ancient or modern. Society has to pay homage to truth or die. Societies should be molded upon truth, and truth has not to adjust itself to society. So there's an amusing and rather quip by this famous playwright, George Bernard Shaw. Yeah, it's not in a play. It's, I think, in one of the introductions to his. In one of the introductions, he says, "The reasonable man adjusts himself to his surroundings. The unreasonable man consistently and unsuccessfully tries to change his surroundings to himself." And then this is perfectly. So the first one is that the reasonable person keeps adapting himself. The unreasonable person basically keeps trying to adapt his surroundings to his ideals. And then he makes this very interesting observation. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. Yeah. All progress, all human progress really depends on making sure that what we have around us, societies that we have around us, are fitted better and better to this subjective ideal that all of us possess in our hearts. Yeah? If such a noble truth as unselfishness cannot be practiced in society, it is better for man to give up society and to go into the forest. That is the daring man. See, this is exactly, so what does it require? What subjective quality does it require to be able to convert these ideas into practice? Because it is hard, because it is not practical in this loose and cheap sense in which we usually use it, because converting an ideal into practice is difficult, what it requires is a certain strength. What kind of strength? Strength of character. In a different place in Karma Yoga, Vivekananda says, work done in the right spirit, what is its output? Its output is strength of character. This subjective effect that work leaves on our consciousness, on our ideas, on our tendencies, that is what is called karma. Work from the subjective point of view is exactly what karma is. See, these people who were ancients, they did not have laboratories or objective analysis tools available to them. Therefore, they analyzed things from a subjective point of view. Therefore, it was the work in terms of its subjective aspect, in terms of the impact that it left on the individual, which was called karma. This, what does this lead to? If it is done with a certain noble purpose consistently for a while, it leads to strength of character. This strength of character is exactly what allows high ideals to be carried out in practice. So which means that the subjective thing that interpolates between the ideal and practice is exactly strength of character. Lack of strength of character, when it fails to convert an ideal into practice, does something else, and essentially because it fails to live up to the ideal, it tends to compromise, sometimes fool itself, and pull the ideal down. In other words, who is one fooling in the process? Only oneself. Nobody else is fooled, or if they are, it's irrelevant. At least as a spiritual practice, what other people think, do not think about this particular act is irrelevant. What is relevant is trying. See, the thing is, there is no harm in failing. There is absolutely no harm in failing. All of us keep trying and slowly, Abhyasa vairagya, so through abhyasa, practice, repeated practice. First time we will not be able to succeed fully. Maybe we will be only partly successful. Slowly, step by step, every act done with a particular higher ideal in view is going to make our mind, our buddhi, our intellect, our heart strong and allow us to carry out these ideals in practice. This is what real practicality is about. The rest is at worst, it cannot be anything more than a sham. Pretending and doing something which is a compromise of certain core principles which one believes in because the situation is too hard is not practicality. That is what is called compromise. We all have to do it. There is no harm in that. But let us be honest about it when we are doing it. I cannot act as if this conviction in some spiritual ideal, I cannot carry it out in practice today. For various, maybe physical limitations, mental limitations, etc., etc. But if we try to cover these lacunae up and basically say that what we are doing is really practical and the ideal is some esoteric thing, what we have done really is forgotten the ideal and we are doing something which is not in tune with the ideal, and we are calling this compromised action a reflection of a certain ideal, which it is not. In other words, the honesty that is required is to understand when, because of certain limitations, we are acting in a particular way. That's all. None of us are perfect, so there's no harm in saying that, look, this is something that we cannot live up to. We are trying. That's the best we can do. And trying consistently will allow us to move closer and closer to the ideal. In other words, carrying out a certain ideal in practice is really what practicality is about. Okay. There are two sorts of, and it requires what? Strength of character. Here he calls it courage. This strength of character is exactly what is called courage. Standing up for what one believes to be true, a conviction in some principle, some core principle, which transcends one's own individual limited being. It has a certain veracity, a certain truth value, which goes way beyond one's individual existence. And when one takes one's stand on this kind of a large impersonal principle, which reflects through various personalities and carries this human society further, and taking that stand when we try to act according to it, that is real practicality. There are two sorts of courage. One is the courage of facing the canon, and the other is the courage of spiritual conviction. An emperor who invaded India was told by his teacher to go and see some of the sages there. And now he's elucidating by an anecdote. This is a very, very nice anecdote. After a long search for one, he found a very old man sitting on a block of stone. The emperor talked with him a little and became very much impressed by his wisdom. He asked the sage to go to his country with him. No, said the sage, I am quite satisfied with my forest here. Said the emperor, I will give you money, position, wealth. I am the emperor of the world. No, replied the man, I don't care for those things. The emperor replied, if you do not go, I will kill you. The man smiled serenely and said, that is the most foolish thing you have ever said, Emperor. You cannot kill me. Me, the sun cannot dry, fire cannot burn, sword cannot kill, for I am the birthless, the deathless, the ever-living, omnipotent, omnipresent Spirit. This is spiritual boldness, while the other is the courage of a lion or a tiger. In the mutiny of 1857, there was a Swami, a very great soul, whom a mutineer stabbed severely. Others caught and brought the man to the Swami, offering to kill him. But the Swami looked up calmly and said, my brother, thou art he, and expired. This is another instance. What good is it to talk of the strength of your muscles, of the superiority of your institutions, if you cannot make truth square with your society? If you cannot build up a society into which the highest truth will fit? What is the good of this boastful talk about your grandeur and greatness if you stand up and say, this courage is not practical? This is exactly the kind of thing that we were discussing. A lack of ability to convert a higher truth into practice, being quoted by this false statement that this is not practical, and so we don't carry it out in practice. Finally, what is that quoting covering? It is covering our own weakness, nothing more. And on the other hand, if one takes a stand and acts despite whatever suffering might come in the process, that gives us strength and gives us this conviction that these ideas, which we read only in books and sometimes see in the lives of great souls, these are indeed practical in a very personal sense, in the sense that we ourselves can carry them out in practice. That's what practicality is all about. Is nothing practical but pounds, shillings, and pence? If so, why boast of your society? And then he describes the highest kind of society that can be built. That society is the greatest, where the highest truths become practical. That is my opinion. And if society is not fit for the highest truths, make it so. And the sooner, the better. Stand up, men and women, in this spirit. Dare to believe in the truth. Dare to practice the truth. The world requires a few hundred bold men and women. Practice that boldness which dares know the truth, which dares show the truth in life, which does not quake before death, nay welcomes death, makes a man know that he is the spirit, that in the whole universe nothing can kill him, then you will be free. Then you will know your real soul. And concludes with, this Atman is first to be heard, then thought about, and then meditated upon. This last quotation is from that glorious Upanishad, the Brihadaranyaka. Yeah? This is Yagnavalkya Maitreyi Samvad, yeah? From the second chapter, and it comes again in the fourth chapter. Atma vare drashtavya, shotavya, mantavya, nididhyasitavya. This Atman is to be seen. First to be heard about, then thought about, analyzed, understood, and then meditated upon. Meditated upon in what sense? First, one hears about it, which means these readings, these classes where we discuss, this is the hearing aspect of it. Then quietly trying to understand for oneself what it means in my life. Are these just some words which we throw around? Occasionally do a little more Shravana by chanting it from memory. It's not memorizing, but it's converting it at least in life at the mental level, which means mentally it becomes more real. Our thought process starts getting influenced by these ideas. This is the effect of manana. Yeah? What does he call it? Thought about, then thought about. First to be heard, then thought about. This is what it means. Thought about means, but I don't feel this way. And then asking oneself, why do I not feel this way? Is there any truth in it? And then we start trying to pose in our own minds the questions, this analysis that has been done in these things. Yeah? Questions that we ask ourselves depending on our life experiences in terms of our convictions. And finally, once through this process of analysis, we have come to the conclusion that, look, this is true. It is true. And it might or might not be today possible for me to carry all of it out in practice, but I can do it only to a limited extent. As we have said, swalpamapyasya dharmasya trayate mahatavo bhayat. Even a little bit of practice relieves us from great fear. After that, how do we strengthen it? How do we strengthen these convictions in terms of our actions? Once one arrives at that conviction is something that captures both our emotional faculty as well as our intellectual faculty. This synthesis of intellect or cogitation and feelings at a higher level is exactly what is called buddhi, or the heart, in Vedanta. Yeah? Buddhi does not mean intellectual cogitation alone. It means refined feelings which complement and support our higher intellectual convictions. Once we come to this conviction, holding on to it, training the mind to hold on to it by a process, this is exactly what meditation is about, a pratyaya. Yeah? Basically thinking firstly reciting in our mind, but then trying to get at the content, the subjective conviction behind a certain idea, and holding on to it in one's heart. This is the process of meditation. Here, it is through this process of analysis that one arrives at it, and hence it is called nididhyasana. It's a different name. It is not there is a difference between that and the usual upasana that is practiced. However, it's essentially a subjective conviction. There's a greater amount of knowledge content rather than a devotion content. That's the emphasis of Vedanta. But on this content which was arrived at by analysis, focusing the mind as if it's like sort of moving inwards by back gear towards one's own subjective reality. Yeah? That's what this is about. Yeah? This process is Vedantic meditation, or called Nididhyasana. And this is what he ends with. Yeah? Let me just repeat those last few lines because they are so inspiring, and then we'll stop for today. The world requires 100 bold men and women. Practice that boldness which dares know the truth, which dares show the truth in life, which does not quake before death, nay, welcomes death, makes a man know that he is the spirit, that in the whole universe nothing can kill him. Then you will be free. Then you will know your real soul. This Atman is first to be heard, then thought about, and then meditated upon. Since we have been discussing this notion today, what we have been discussing is essentially this notion of truth. There is this passage from the Mundaka Upanishad, Satyameva Jayate na Anritam. It is truth that triumphs, not falsehood. Yeah. This does not, it's not something for parroting. Yeah. We have our national slogan, which is Satyameva Jayate. That's this thing that comes below this Ashok Chakra. What it requires is a strict carrying out in practice. It is more necessary today than anything else. We are flooded with misinformation. We are flooded with fake news. This is a certain wonderful opportunity for us to exercise this discriminatory power. How do we sift out the truth from the narrative? The narrative is the Purusha Tantra part. Sometimes it has varying quantities of truth content. Sometimes very little, sometimes a little more, sometimes maybe it is in fact true. How are we going to find it? How are we going to find what is true in this huge ocean of information with which we are bombarded nowadays, thanks to the internet, thanks to social media, thanks to various outlets that keep trying to manufacture narratives rather than present the truth? This is an opportunity for us. This is an opportunity for us to exercise our analytical abilities by maybe pitching various narratives against each other, so that which is the dross in one knocks off the dross in the other, and only that which is common to the two is incontrovertible. It is shared by people from opposite ideologies, and hence must be true. This is one particular way of trying to sift out, in this day of a lot of information, what part of this information is misinformation, what part of this information is actually indicative of truth. So we need not complain about the huge amount of fake news, misinformation, bad information with which we are bombarded. For those of us who want to carry this kind of stuff out in practice, it's an opportunity. And that opportunity to be actually utilized, what we need to do is sharpen the sword of discrimination, to cut away the rubbish, throw it in the dustbin, and retain only that which is factual. In other words, cutting off the narrative and retaining only the fact. This is something that we can certainly do, as we were basically saying, provided we are interested. If we are committed to the truths, then this is a certain mental culture we will automatically be giving ourselves. Not stories, not narratives, but fact. This is the orientation of the mind which is inclined towards this particular path. The analytical faculty and the will tagged on to that. As Vivekananda says, the analytical will is exactly the instrument that a person who is trying to practice Jnana Yoga, convert this idea of the Atman into practice, this is the faculty that must be honed, sharpened, and kept strong. Okay. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.